Elite 2025 guard Jasper Johnson recently included the Louisville Cardinals in his top 5. On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we're explaining that despite it being an uphill battle to land the Kentucky native, just the fact that Louisville was included on this list is both encouraging and significant. We'll break it down on today's episode of the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, welcome in to this Thursday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. As always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. A lot of basketball talk on the show today. Jasper Johnson cut his list to 5. Louisville included in the mix. It's not going to be an easy battle, but I'm going to explain why I feel better about the Cardinals' chances today than I did even a month ago. And there's another prospect that cut his list to 5. Jaylen Dean Vines included Louisville in that cut. Sort of an unknown prospect to Cardinals fans. Does Louisville have a good chance at landing Dean Vines? We'll break it down coming up shortly, and then we'll also discuss Louisville's non-conference schedule being released. Louisville having some challenging games early on, but also great opportunities to get some signature wins in the first couple months of the season. A lot of basketball talk that popped up literally within 24 hours. And that's great. It's a great type of overwhelming. You would rather have basketball recruiting news and basketball news than not having, basketball news and recruiting news. So it's awesome to have. And it all feels like good news. Well, it doesn't all feel like good news. It all is good news for the Louisville Cardinals. Louisville notably included in Jasper Johnson's top 5, the number 10 ranked player in the country, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, is one of the top 3. He's listed as a shooting guard, but honestly, he's more of a combo guard, in my opinion. 6'4", 175-pound native of Kentucky, spent his first couple of seasons of high school at Woodford County, went to Link Academy for his junior season and has since transferred back. More on the update of news in his senior season, where he'll be playing his senior season coming up here shortly. But the Louisville Cardinals were included with Alabama, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Arkansas. All 4 of the other schools, I would say, feel confident in their chances for the 5-star guards services. Each school has a reason to feel good. Obviously, the ties to the program with Kentucky, being from that area, makes the Wildcats feel good. The relationship with John Calipari at Arkansas makes the Razorbacks feel good. North Carolina, being a blue blood and always included in that recruitment, makes the Tar Heels feel good. Hubert Davis and Sean May have proven to be critical in that. And Alabama was the first Power 5 school to offer Jasper Johnson back in the day, and he has a great relationship with Nate Oates. So nonetheless, Louisville has some really tough competition, and it's going to be an uphill battle. Let's sort of get through the harsh reality first before we get to the encouraging part of this. I'll come out and say it. The Cardinals probably rank number 5 on the list as of July 25th. Like, if you had to rank like how the teams will likely unfold as it relates to the chances for Jasper Johnson, the Cardinals are probably at number 5. It wouldn't really surprise anyone. In fact, I had been told by multiple people in the high school recruiting realm, analysts, some high school coaches, all have pretty much unanimously told me that they don't really feel like Jasper Johnson would give Louisville a ton of interest. There wouldn't be a ton of interest from Jasper Johnson's camp. When Kenny Payne was there, I know that, there were rumors that maybe, Payne would try to get Jasper to reclassify. I know that was like a rumor that never really got confirmed, but it was something that was talked about. It felt like the Cardinals have always been a long shot in this recruitment. And you can argue that they still are, even though that they're in the top 5, they still could be considered a long shot. In fact, in Travis Branham's article, national recruiting analyst for 24/7 Sports, Johnson spoke about all 5 of the final contenders. Well, technically he didn't. He didn't speak about one school. That's the Louisville Cardinals. Now, I know that when Pat Kelsey took the job, he made it a point of emphasis right away to start to prioritize guys like Jasper Johnson, Malachi Moreno, and others. And it seems like they've started to try to build that relationship in a hurry. Louisville is Pat Kelsey is unfortunately on the wrong end of time here in that regard. But they're trying to make up ground as fast as they can. So Louisville not really being highly involved, it seems, never feeling like the go-to choice at all in terms of national perception, and seemingly have to play catch-up. It doesn't feel like the Cardinals have a great chance, right? And I would argue that to be the case, but as that is true, multiple things can be at one time. I also think that while that is true, it is encouraging that Louisville is in the top 5, because you could play the devil's advocate and say, yeah, well, maybe Louisville's they haven't really been that seriously involved in this recruitment. But with them being in the top 5 now, it shows that there has to be substantial concrete interest from both sides. You know that Louisville's interest, I mean, Jasper Johnson's a top 10 player, but now that the Cardinals are in the top 5, it is showing you that, hey, look, they seemingly have a larger chance than what is being led to believe. And one thing that I think is very, very interesting, there's 2 things that I think both work to Louisville's advantage. The first thing is that it was announced about a month ago, maybe even a little over a month ago, that Jasper Johnson was going to transfer back to Woodford County after spending 1 season at Link Academy in Branson, Missouri. That was supposed to be what happened. And it seemed like all things pointed to that. And if that was going to be the case, then Louisville is really going to face an uphill battle, because you're talking about a player that has ties to the Kentucky program, that would legitimately be in the Wildcats' backyard. Versailles is like less than 30 minutes away from Rupp Arena. Woodford County, like I'm not sure the geography, but I'm sure that you can make it from Woodford County to Rupp Arena in very close to 30 minutes. So you're right there. But news came out pretty much unexpectedly. I didn't know until I started to do more research. Johnson has signed to play with Overtime Elite for his senior season. Maybe I just missed it, even though when I searched Jasper Johnson's name on social media, on the internet, there aren't that many headlines really confirming this, but that's huge. That is absolutely huge, because you're going from playing your senior season in Kentucky's backyard to now going and playing in Atlanta, Georgia, and maybe that internal influence, or maybe I should say external influence, isn't as heavy as it would have been had you played your senior season in Woodford County. You're playing Overtime Elite, which I'm fine with that level of competition. There have been some top players to come out of that league, and it's a really solid opportunity for him, and that's good news for Louisville. Put it this way, it can't hurt. I'm not sure it's going to help a ton, but it definitely does not hurt. However, the one thing that I found very interesting from that article that Travis Branham wrote, remember when I said that Louisville wasn't mentioned? It's a sentence at the very end that Branham states that I'll be honest, it makes me feel better about this recruitment today than I did a month ago. This is what Branham said in that article. He says, while at Peach Jam, Johnson spoke with 24/7 Sports on 4 of his finalists, Alabama, Arkansas, Kentucky, and North Carolina. Let's stop the sentence right there. After what I'm about to say, he goes into, sort of recalling what Johnson told him. But this is where I find things interesting. while at Peach Jam, Johnson spoke with 24/7 Sports on 4 of his finalists, listing the schools out. He goes on to say, whereas Louisville has flown under the radar and snuck their way into the Final Five. That makes me feel encouraged. Now, does that mean that Louisville is the team to beat or that they have a legitimate, concrete chance? Perhaps not. I think it's hopefully too early to tell, but it's significant and notable and encouraging that Louisville is even in the top 5. I would argue that it should make you feel more encouraged with that sentence that Brandon mentioned, because it kind of shows that Louisville's starting to gain some momentum, like Pat Kelsey getting hired and prioritizing Louisville. The Cardinals utilizing the NIL standards and the programs in place, which they did in the transfer portal, and are, showing that they are in tune with, their NIL infrastructure and their budget, and they have some resources to hand out. It seems like everything is sort of coming together to work in the Cardinals' favor. Now, what needs to happen moving forward? Well, Louisville needs to get him onto campus multiple times this fall. I know it's going to be a little bit harder now that he's in Atlanta versus Woodford County, but you probably take that trade-off, with him not playing high school ball in Lexington or very close to it. They need to get him on campus for a football game. They need to get him on campus for a basketball game, hoping that he doesn't make his commitment soon. Who knows when that commitment is? I don't think that he has announced when that date is going to be at the moment. I'll look into that real quick. Should have already had that. Joe Tipton reports that Johnson has not scheduled any other visits or set a date to announce a decision. So he's officially scheduled visits for Alabama, Kentucky, or he has visited Alabama, Kentucky, and North Carolina officially. Hopefully now, to get in the mix, you have to have an official visit to Louisville. But that is going to be one that we monitor closely. Everyone knows Jasper Johnson. Everyone knows the name. It is probably the one player that a lot of fans would like to see in this class. However, even though there are some names that we don't know about, that doesn't mean that Louisville isn't working behind the scenes. The Cardinals were included in a top 5 for a rising 3-star prospect that not many Cardinal fans knew who he was. I'm going to tell you who that is, how Louisville's chances are at the moment, and what he could bring to the program coming up here after we tell you about our friends over at Gametime. Today's episode of the show brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. I've used Gametime for NFL tickets, college football tickets, college basketball tickets, and concert tickets. And you can bet that I'm going to use them for MLB tickets when my Houston Astros travel to Cincinnati for a Labor Day series starting on that Monday. With the app, it has made it to where I will not use another ticketing service. You can see the all-in prices on the app to where there are no surprise fees at checkouts. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and you always have the lowest price guarantee, which means that you will find the lowest price in your section. But if you find it for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And before we get into the next segment of the show, sorry, my nose has been itching a ton, but nonetheless, one thing that I want to remind you all of and implore that you take advantage of is the access to Locked On Sports Today. It's a 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And into the second segment of this Thursday edition of Locked On Louisville. Once again, thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. basketball recruiting, it's early, but it's not. I mean, you're hearing about a lot of visits being scheduled, teams starting to prioritize other players, commitment dates being finalized. So the fact that more and more names keep popping up for Louisville as it relates to 2025 targets, that's not alarming. In fact, that's fairly normal. But for a player to announce a top 5 and the majority of Louisville fans to not know who that name is, I think it's fairly interesting. Jaylen Dean Vines included Louisville in his top 5 on Wednesday. Dean Vines from Dallas, Texas, plays at Kimball High School, 6'3" guard, ranked at the highest as a 3-star level player, according to 24/7 Sports. And in some recruiting services, he's not even ranked. Now, he is a rising prospect. We'll talk about how he's going to rise more and more. But Louisville was included in the top 5, along with Central Florida, Texas A&M, Vanderbilt, and West Virginia. In an article by Joe Tipton of On3 Sports, the first sentence, actually after the first sentence where he lists the finalists, this is the very interesting part of this. Tipton says, and I quote, "It should be noted that each of his finalists have extended scholarships besides Louisville. The Cardinals have recently shown interest." In that same article, he says, from a quote from Dean Vines, "Coach Ronnie Hamilton recruited me for Louisville, and I think they can really develop my guard skills a bunch while I'm there." Now, Tipton does mention that A&M is the only school in that group that Vines has actually visited. It was an unofficial back in the college basketball season, and he plans to visit A&M and Vanderbilt, but no other visits are scheduled. Louisville being in this top 5, despite not offering, makes me wonder two things, or it makes me think two things. Number one, there is concrete interest from JDV to come to Louisville, that relationship with the Cardinals. I mean, why else would you include a school that's in your top 5 if that school hasn't even offered? And number two, even more importantly, I feel like Louisville is really doing their homework with scouting here. Maybe they don't necessarily prioritize Dean Vines unless they miss on a couple of their other top guard prospects, but fairly interesting nonetheless. Dean Vines, 6'3", out of Dallas, will play his final season of college ball in Phoenix at Phoenix Prep for his senior season. His play in Nike EYBL Peach Jam play for Team Griffin, where he averaged about 15 points per game, was really solid. He definitely solidified himself as one of the best high-flying dunkers in the class. Like, there were multiple poster situations in the EYBL. Averaged about 14 points per game on close to 50% shooting at Kimball as a junior. 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 2.5 or close to 2.5 steals, which I think is very solid. Shows his on-ball defense, but only 25% from the three-point line. That's what I wonder is, what is the trajectory looking like for his offensive skill set? How does he project at the next level? And if he feels that Louisville can develop those guard skills, I think that the shot or the shooting form really isn't broken. There's no like mechanical issues to the point to where I think he could be a respectable three-point shooter with the correct amount of development and work into that shot. But I wonder how the offensive skill set will pan out at the next level. I think that he projects as a plus level defender in the ACC, but nonetheless, this is one recruitment to watch. And especially from Louisville's side, when will Louisville make an offer? Will Louisville make an offer is probably the better question. If they do, I think you should start to look at this recruitment very, very seriously. Guys have included schools in their top 3, top 5 list cuts, and maybe there's not much traction from both sides. Maybe it's sort of a one-sided street at the moment. It's a one-way street, not a two-sided street. It's a one-way street, but definitely a recruitment to sort of keep tabs on. I think if Louisville doesn't end up offering, then this discussion is probably for nothing. But with the comments about Ronnie Hamilton, with the inclusion of Louisville, I think you see more teams that aren't really involved in a recruitment be included in like football list cuts versus basketball list cuts. Now, there are some that, you see a school's name and you're like, man, there is no way he's going to that school. They are definitely not prioritizing him. You wonder if that's the case here. How interested is Louisville? He was a name that I had never even heard of in this recruiting class until that list cut. So I think it's pretty significant. But until they offer, you can sort of keep this in the back of your mind. But when/if the Cardinals offer, then it becomes immediately significant, because then obviously it feels like Pat Kelsey and company are going to prioritize him more than maybe previously perceived. So a lot of recruiting discussions to be had over, the remainder of the summer as we head into the fall. More official visits are going to be scheduled and conducted, so we will keep a close eye out on those. Speaking of the fall, the season getting closer and closer and closer, and well, you get the point. We're just a couple months away. In fact, Louisville's non-conference slate was released, and I'll be honest, it's pretty interesting. It's pretty clear that the Cardinals will definitely not have a shortage of tough competition. They'll have some early tests, but also some key opportunities to get some signature wins in the first couple months of Pat Kelsey's first year at Louisville. We'll break down the non-conference slate here coming up after the break. And as we head into this final segment of the Locked On Louisville podcast, do want to give a shout out across the way to Locked On Kentucky's or Locked On Wildcats Lance Dahl. He does a great job of hosting that podcast, covering the Kentucky Wildcats. And I know it's not necessarily popular for me to give a shout out to the competitors podcast host, but nonetheless, Lance is a friend of mine. He is a great host of the show. He's very fair. Now, he's biased, as we all are. We're all biased for our own team, but he is really, really fair. And he does a great job of, being realistic about Kentucky. And if you want to hear about the team down the road, if you want to know about, how good their football team is going to be, if you want to know how Kentucky feels about the recruitment of Jasper Johnson, definitely feel free to tune over into that show. But nonetheless, Louisville's non-conference schedule is out. And my first takeaway was that it's going to be a challenging slate overall. However, the Cardinals have some key opportunities to pick up some signature resume building wins early on in the schedule. That's the main takeaway from this. The schedule opens up. They play Young Harris in an exhibition game on October 21st. The next exhibition game is to be determined. They'll open up the season officially on November 4th at home against Morehead State. Now, Morehead State was pretty solid a year ago. They did end up losing their basketball coach. They ended up picking up Jonathan Maddox as their coach. He was a manager on the team and a associate head coach this past season, but Preston Spradlin made his way elsewhere. He went to James Madison. Morehead State coming off of a tournament appearance. Pretty solid first opponent. However, you also feature mid-major teams like Bellarmine. A couple weeks after that, Bellarmine, coached by Scotty Davenport, usually very competitive. They beat Louisville in Kenny Payne's first season. The Cardinals beat them in his second season. They'll play Winthrop, where Pat Kelsey used to coach. That was his first D1 head coaching job. They'll have UTEP in December, and their final non-conference game will be hosting Eastern Kentucky at the Yum Center on December 28th. Outside of that, all of the other games will feature either Power 5 opposition or they will play in the battle for Atlantis. That's the key thing here, is that they have some key opposition. Looking at that second game of the year, they will host. It's the first of a home-and-home series. They'll play Tennessee. Rick Barnes has probably a very good team coming in like he does every year. Now, you can say what you want about their postseason success. They are a good team. They are a very, very good regular season team. That is going to be an extremely challenging first Power 5 game for Pat Kelsey's squad. It's a bye week for the football team, so the Yum will be rocking Floyd Street. Actually, technically not Floyd Street. Main Street will be absolutely on 10. And I'm really excited to see the Yum rocking again. Tennessee is going to be a challenging opponent for the Cardinals early on in the season, but nonetheless, a great opportunity to get a signature win right away and start to change that perception a little bit. Louisville, a couple weeks after that, will play in the battle for Atlantis. The first opponent is to be determined, but the field is really, really good. Gonzaga and Arizona are in the group of 8. They made the Sweet 16 last year. Davidson, Indiana, Oklahoma, Providence, and West Virginia round out the field. Nonetheless, I think it's safe to say that any of those opponents you could chalk up as being a quality team to play against. And not to mention, the more games you win in that battle for Atlantis, the more opportunities that you have to continually build that resume, because ultimately that's what you're trying to do, because there is a chance that Louisville could be on the bubble this year. I don't think that they will be, but they could be potentially, because they haven't really played together yet. 13 new players, but I think that Louisville will be better than that. Assuming, let's play the hypothetical that they are on the bubble, it would be key to get those opportunities at some resume building wins early on. And you could argue that every win that they could see in that battle for Atlantis would be a resume boosting win. So early on in November, Tennessee and up to 4 really good opponents in November. It doesn't get any easier right after that in the SEC ACC Challenge. They'll play host to Ole Miss. Chris Beard's team will come to the Yum Center, where they had a up and down season, but for the most part, it surprised the nation. The team led by Chris Beard will be a solid level of opposition. And then December 14th, on the road at Kentucky and Lexington. I don't have to tell you why that's important, how that could build your resume, and more. So you look at the non-conference slate. You have 3 SEC teams on the non-conference slate: Tennessee, Kentucky, and Mississippi. All 3 could be realistically in the top 5 of the SEC standings. And then you have solid mid-major opposition like Morehead State and Bellarmine, 2 in-state teams. And Eastern Kentucky, it's to be determined if they'll be good. Same thing with Winthrop. But you also will play in the battle for Atlantis. So there's not going to be an easy team to play in that. So nonetheless, the takeaway from the non-conference slate, and we knew that Louisville was playing Tennessee and Ole Miss and Kentucky in the battle for Atlantis. But with the whole schedule together, I think it's key to, make sure that we reiterate that this is not going to be an easy non-conference slate. Like, Louisville probably won't be undefeated by the time they get into conference play. That's okay. If they are, oh my gosh, that'd be great. But as tough as it's going to be, I look at this from the standpoint of, you have a good team, you have a ton of talent on that team, and if they want to prove themselves early on, if Pat Kelsey wants to show that, hey, not only can I talk the talk, but I can walk the walk on the court, you're going to have the opportunity to do so right away. First week of the season, you're going to have a chance to do so. So, very intriguing non-conference slate. That is going to wrap up this Thursday edition of the show. Tomorrow, we will sort of break down what Jeff Brom, Quincy Riley, Tyler Shuck, Ashton Gelati, what they had to say at ACC Media Day this week, and some key takeaways from that. But as we head into the weekend, we will continue through our position previews with the linebackers, cornerbacks, and safety. So a lot of football talk coming up. Be sure to stay tuned. That's going to wrap up this Thursday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. Have a great start to the weekend. Go Cards.